Hey everyone, we are live from my home in Palo Alto, and I'm live here with a few friends, Lizia, Tomas, and Maria, and we got some bad news yesterday, right? That the government is going to end the DACA program in 6 months, and is now kicking it over to Congress, who will hopefully do the right thing and pass a permanent legislative solution, something like the DREAM Act. But this is something that I know we're all still really processing. And I just thought that it would be good to sit down and talk with some dreamers about their stories and hear what their experience is like and what you've basically what your journey has been like to get DACA, to earn it, really. The conversations that you've had with people along the way, and what this all means to you. I'll say up front, immigration is a really complicated issue, right? And there are lots of different parts of it, and everyone cares deeply about having a safe country and making sure that we can have a vibrant economy, and wants to have the best people coming into the country to that can do the best work and have the best ideas. I think we all know that some really high percent, I think it's almost half of the major technology companies have been started by immigrants as one of their co-founders. If you look at the 5 biggest technology companies today, I think almost half of them, I think 40% of them are run by people who came from another country. On the economic side, and then on the cultural and moral side of the question, it's just, there are lots of different parts to the immigration problem, but the part that we're going to talk about today with dreamers, or young folks like you all, who have been brought to the country at a young age, have not really known another country, right? And this is, I think, in a lot of ways the most clear cut of all the immigration issues. There are lots of debate that I think people in good faith can have around what you should do with the immigration system, but with what you should do with dreamers and the compassion that we should be showing, I think there is no question. And I think for a lot of people, this is the thing that people had always assumed would be the most safe, right? Because if we're not comfortable as a society, if we don't have the moral strength to say that we're going to stand up for people who have been in this country since childhood and who didn't choose to come here on their own, they're contributing to their communities and to the economy, then I think for a lot of us it makes us question what can we assume that our fellow people in this country are going to stand for. And I know that's something that a lot of us are just processing and are trying to understand. But this is an important issue. And I think, and I wrote this yesterday in a post, that I think rescinding DACA is a particularly cruel and difficult decision to make. Because when the administration under President Obama made the decision to start DACA and invited you all and 800,000 other people to come out of the shadows and say, hey, I'm here and I'm undocumented in order to get a work status and the right permit. That to offer the American dream to people and then to take it away and punish people for trusting their government and coming out of the shadows and filing that and applying for that is one of the most troubling things that I think I've seen in a long time in our country. So I'm hoping to talk about that. And I know we've been sitting here and talking for a little bit, but I think it would be useful for all the folks who are out there to hear your stories on this, and then maybe towards the end we can get to what we can all do together to make sure that we all resolve this well. But maybe I'd love to start just by having you each tell your story about how you came to the country, how you earned DACA, and what that means to you. So I don't know if you want to get started.
Sure. Thanks for having us over. I came to the U.S. in 1996 from Canada. Their economy was really bad. My dad was a realtor. Nobody was buying houses, and my mom was a bank teller, and she lost her job. So My dad came over here, bought a business, and about a year later, he got a visa for us to come over. So we moved to San Antonio. I grew up there, went to elementary school, middle school, high school there. I was a Girl Scout. It was a pretty all-American upbringing. I learned how to square dance, actually. I spent 5 years learning how to do that in elementary school. And during my junior year of college, I got a letter in the mail from the Department of Homeland Security. And it was a notice to appear in immigration court, which is basically the first step in the deportation process. I had never, that was the first time I'd learned that I was undocumented, just because I always had a driver's license and I had a social security number, and I did all the things that Americans do. And so when I got that letter, I was completely blindsided.
And you were in college.
I was in the middle of college. I had already taken out tens of thousands of dollars in student loans. It's hard, I think, as sort of, being like 20 years old and learning that you are not supposed to be here, because I grew up as an American. And the DACA program was announced on my college graduation day. And so I remember sitting at my ceremony, and I was trying to think of, what am I supposed to do with this I went to Northwestern for college. It was a private school. I had taken out so many loans, and I didn't know how I was going to pay all of that money back, and what I was supposed to do with this degree that I had spent so much time trying to get. And on that day, the DACA program was announced. And fortunately, because of that program, I was able to get a work permit, and I got a job. I got 2 jobs, actually. I started a small business writing resumes for people to help Americans get jobs. I bought a house. I bought a car. I think it was so transformative, not only economically, but just mentally, knowing that there is certainty that I can have, and being able to like get back to this country that I call home. I think for me, it's like really hard to reconcile even today, the fact that I'm technically, undocumented, just because I just feel American in every single way. And I think what DACA has also done for us is, as dreamers, we know, we recognize why the program is so transformative, and I think we have such a deep sense of gratitude and appreciation for what the program does, and we want to give back. Like that's what DACA allows us to do.
Yeah, and I think I didn't call this out up front, but Lizia and Maria work at Forward, which is the organization that a group of tech leaders and myself helped to start a few years back to advocate for immigration reform overall. Not just for the tech industry, but the biggest issue, of course, is how do we as a country act with heart for the 11 million folks who are here who are undocumented, of which about somewhere between maybe 2.3, 2.5 million folks are dreamers, and of that, about 800,000 have earned DACA. So we have some history in terms of working together on this. And I know that this is something that you focused on for a while, but it's just amazing. I mean, coming here from Canada and growing up and not realizing that your country might not give you the full access to benefits or citizenship, and you have no pathway currently to become a citizen.
Right.
But your family is here. I mean, this has been your life.
Right, and we came on a visa, so I spent my entire life trying to get legal, and but we fell out of status because one time our lawyer filed our paperwork late, and another time the employer sponsoring us sold his business, and so because of that change in ownership, we had to restart the entire application process. So we tried really hard, and we played by the rules, and it's just things. I mean, it's been 21 years and we are still out of status, and there's nothing that we can do to fix that.
Yeah. No, I think that this is something that is actually a pretty common misperception about immigration, right? I think people have this perception that the majority of people who are here and who are undocumented came in and weren't working or doing anything like this, but the majority of folks who are undocumented in this country have a story which is like yours, right? Where their parents or they came in, were working, had a visa, and something got messed up along the way, right? And often it's just a really tactical little clerical error, or your lawyer forgets to file something even if you were supposed to have the right to be here, and then you're just done, right? I mean, there's no way to get back on the train in terms of having full status. And I don't think that when people talk about wanting good immigrants who add to the country to be here, this is what we're talking about, right? We want people like you and your family to be here, and I think that anyone who meets you is going to have that sense, and I think that that's just a very common misperception that folks have about this. So Tomas,
Yes.
Why don't you share your story around how you and your family came to the country?
Yeah, so thank you once again for having us here. I really appreciate your invitation. But my story starts a little bit different. Before I was born, my father abandoned our family, and I was born in Mexico in a very poor town, and my mother had very tough decisions to make when I was born. Either stay in the country and live, in a very poor town with very little opportunity, or immigrate to the United States and give your children an opportunity for a better life, and so that their work can mean something. And so we were left. My mother actually came here first, and she left us when I was one year old, and she came here. And for the second time in my life, when I look back at it, I feel like a second parent abandoned me. But like in the words of Agatha Christie, a mother's love is like nothing else in the world. And when she got here, she worked very hard and was able to send for us. And so I arrived here at the age of 2, and this is where I started preschool. We were in Santa Barbara, and unfortunately, when I was 5 years old, she was diagnosed with cancer. And when I was 6 years old, she ended up passing away. And so that was, as a child, I didn't really know what that meant until later on in life. But we ended up moving up here to Auburn, California, and grew up in Auburn. And, as a kid, you don't really understand what's going on. You're just, enjoying life and, going to school and hanging out with your friends, playing sports. Doesn't really hit you until later on when you start thinking about life, when you start looking to apply for a job, or when you're looking to get a driver's license just like any other of your friends. And then when the time comes to look at your career and look at colleges, it really hits you then. And actually, when I found out when I was 15 years old, after I wanted to buy a cell phone, and I realized that I gotta work for that cell phone, and my grandparents taught me that I needed to work for my things. So that's why when I started kind of looking into applying for a job, and when you find out, you feel very alone, because you think at that time that nobody else is going through this, and nobody really talks about it because it's something that is you're afraid to speak out. And so when I was 17, actually, I went to 2 attorneys, because I did. When I realized my situation, I went to 2 attorneys, and we looked at my situation, and both of them, separate attorneys, said, "There's no pathway for you. You need to wait until Congress passes a bill in order for you to even apply to get in line." And so after that, I went back, and I've always also wanted to fight for this country. I actually was looking to go into the Navy, and after high school, I did call a recruiter, and the recruiter unfortunately told me that I wasn't able to join the Navy. He told me that because I was undocumented, that I couldn't join the military at all. Now, I'm not sure if that was false information or if he was misinformed, but that killed my dreams of fighting for this country. And so that's why I focused in school and athletics. I ran track and field at Cal State Stanislaus in Turlock. I got my degree in kinesiology, and afterwards I decided to move back to the town of Auburn and see how I can help my community. And so I know Lizzie and Maria work for Forward.us, but what I've been doing is I created a group called California Dreamers, and we started speaking out. We started telling our stories, educating the community, but also we wanted to be the solution of some of the issues in our community, which is homelessness and other issues like with veterans and seniors. And so on top of educating the community, we started also serving the community, and so that's what my group does. And through that, we hope to make a change not only for immigration reform, but also through the change in helping our community. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that you just touched on around not having a pathway, I think is one of the other very common misperceptions around this. I mean, when I posted on the DACA a few times over the past week, and as I read the comments, I mean, this is one of the common things that I'm sure you get in all your conversations. It's just like, all right, well, why don't you just apply for citizenship? Right. And I think the thing that most people don't get is that there is currently no legal way for someone who is undocumented in the country to apply for citizenship. So, I mean, that I think is a thing that, when we look forward to what Congress needs to do in terms of, we have a 6-month window now, there's a lot of urgency to try to get something done. That's one of the things that I think in order to really live out the values of our country, we need to make sure that everyone who is here has a path to earn it over time. I mean, whether it's serving in the military or serving your country in some other way, it could be waiting a while. I mean, you guys have all been here for a very long time. I mean, it's 20 years, right? It's not that dreamers aren't patient or aren't willing to give to the country. It is that there is currently literally no legal pathway at all to apply and become a citizen. And living with that, I think, is really tough.
Yeah. All we're asking is for a chance. We're not saying, give this to us now. We're asking us to, hey, give us an opportunity for us to even start. And that's what we're here.
All right, Maria.
So, like everyone said, thanks for taking the time to chat with us. I want to start off by stating the obvious that, we and I feel American, and I am American, and the only thing that we are lacking is a proper documentation to say that. I came here when I was 5 years old from Peru. My sister had been hit by a car, and her right leg needed to be amputated when she was 2.5. So we would fly to Florida constantly because the medical treatment in the United States, it's far more advanced than a medical treatment in Peru, which is a developing country. My parents just wanted the best for their children. So we would fly up to Florida, and it started to become too financially straining. And we moved to Connecticut when I was 5 years old because we had family and my sister could continue her treatment there. Mm-hmm. And I grew up a very normal life, like Lesia. I was in Girl Scouts, Troop 207, I still remember. I played basketball, I played the clarinet, wasn't that great at it, but...
Me too.
Yeah?
I also played the clarinet and was not good.
Yeah. I think I should have picked another instrument, but, I invested in the clarinet, and I had great friends, and I had a really good education, and I always knew that there was something different with my family. My mom would get really tense when she would drive by a police officer because when you're undocumented, you can't get a license in many states. So my mom would get really tense, which kind of conditioned me to get really tense when we would drive by a police officer, even if I was in another car and my mom wasn't driving. And then when I got to high school and I turned 16, I knew we were undocumented, but I didn't really know what it meant or specifically what it would mean for me. And then when I turned 16, I realized that I had no social security number, so I couldn't apply to get a driver's license and I couldn't get a job. And I found myself making up all these excuses to my peers. I would tell them I can't get a license because my sister was hit by a car when she was really young and her leg had to be amputated, and my mom's just really nervous about me driving. So it was different stories that I would fabricate to try to appear as normal as I could to my peers. And then later on, when I was a senior in high school, and I had done well in high school, I had applied to colleges, I had gotten accepted. But when you're undocumented, you're not eligible to get financial aid, and you're also not eligible for many government loans and grants. And my mom is a housekeeper, and even though she's worked tremendously hard and she's always made sure that me and my sister had everything we needed, there really wasn't a way for her to be able to pay thousands and thousands of dollars every year to put me through school. So that was one of the really hard moments that I had to accept, and I had to accept that I was undocumented and what that meant. And then ironically, on the last day of high school, I had just finished taking an exam for social studies, and I got a text. President Obama has announced a Deferred Action Program for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, and I didn't really know what that meant. I couldn't process it, but I knew at that point that my life was about to change. And since then, the lives of 800,000 other people like myself, our lives have changed. So that was one of the big moments in my life. And then shortly after, in 2013, in the summer of 2013, my grandmother passed away in Peru, and it had always been one of my mom's dreams to go back and see her parents. But when you're undocumented, you can't leave the country because you can't come back in. And my grandma passed away, and my mom had to watch her mother's funeral through an iPad. And I will never forget the screams my mom let out as she was hugging this iPad as if she was hugging her mom one last time. And to me, that was a huge injustice that she was forced to watch her mother's funeral on an iPad due to the broken immigration system that our country has. And at that moment, I decided that this issue wasn't just about me not being able to drive or not being able to go to college, but this issue was much greater. And there were many people with similar stories who were experiencing these hardships every single day. So I went to school. I did 2 years at community college, and I worked really hard. I was able to get a scholarship that I worked very hard for at a four-year university. I graduated, and since then I have just been living my dreams of being able to work in the immigration space to make sure that no one has to experience what my mom had to experience. And DACA has allowed me to do that. You know, like I said before, I am American. I feel American. But there's also this weight that comes with it, that even though you feel American, you're constantly told that this country might not want to accept you, that you constantly have to plan for a life, or potentially you could be deported back to a country some of us haven't been to in decades. I haven't been to Peru in 19 years. So how do you plan for that? How do you plan to one day not be able to work? How do I sign a lease in a few months if I don't know if in a few months I'll have a job? And how do I prepare myself to go back to Peru? And I don't even know the accents in the language because I'm really bad at writing in Spanish because I grew up here. I went to kindergarten here, you know. And these are silly little thoughts that I have to start thinking about because of the current political state of where our lives hang. So we're, you know, like my friends here said, we're just asking for the opportunity to be able to stay here in the country we love and the country we grew up in, and the only country that we know as home.
Yeah, and that's really powerful. I mean, there are a few things in what you just said that I think are really worth emphasizing. I mean, first, you are American, right? I mean, like you said, and our country is better for having you here, right? And not just because of the different diversity and experience that you bring, but because you all worked super hard, right? I mean, you're what we all want our children and our peers to go do, right? Work hard, go to college, train, do something you believe in, and push a field forward. And I mean, that's as American as it gets. And that's, you know, I think what we try to be about. So I mean, I really agree with you on that. The second thing you said that I think is really important is another common misperception that I see all the time, which is that people say, okay, well, these folks who are undocumented, you know, are they taking resources that should be going to other people who are here illegally? And I think one thing that people don't get is that when you're undocumented, you do not qualify for any federal benefits. You cannot get access to any scholarships, but you pay taxes. I mean, you've all had jobs, and you're all paying taxes. Either the company is paying for you, or you're paying income tax. So you're contributing to the society and the community and the economy through the work that you're doing, and getting none of the benefits. And that's something that it always bothers me when people say, hey, you know, these folks are taking resources that should go to people who went through the process the right way, as if there actually were a right way for you to be able to go through the process, which we already talked about. And so that one I think is just a really important thing to clear up. And the third piece around the police and talking about how you and your mom tense up. I mean, I've just sat with so many folks who are undocumented who tell me stories about how their landlord cheats them, or they get robbed, or sexual assault. I mean, if you get raped, God forbid, you aren't sure if you can go to the police because they might deport your family. And I mean, that is just an insane state for our country to be in. And I mean, that I think is something that is underscored in what you shared. I mean, you shared one story of this, but I mean, there are many more like this too that I think we've all heard in this community. That I just don't think anyone here who has good conscience should state that this is the way that our country should work. So thank you for sharing your stories. I want to move the conversation a little bit to conversations that you've all had with folks, right? Who, so you come out, you say you're undocumented, you're a dreamer, and people will come at you with all these different misperceptions about what that means. So I'm curious to hear, what are the common misperceptions that you've heard, other than some of the ones that we've talked about? I think we've hit on a few of them so far. But also in the conversations that you've had, what have you said that has actually changed some people's minds? When you've sat down with people, because a lot of people, I think the media likes to portray stuff as everyone is so polarized and they're hardened in their opinion. But as I've traveled around the country, my perception is most people are good and most people are pretty open-minded, right? When you sit down and talk to people, and I bet that each of you has had an experience where you've talked to people about this program who might have come in with a different attitude, but after hearing your story, came away with a different opinion. And I'm curious how that went. So I don't know which of you wants to start on this one.
Go ahead. So I actually had an interesting conversation a couple weeks ago. I was flying back from San Francisco, and it was a direct flight to DC, and there was no Wi-Fi, and I hadn't planned for that. And so I ended up making friends with my neighbor who had voted for President Trump and said that he had voted because he wanted to keep out the criminals. And so as we had talked about, immigration came up, and he mentioned he knew what DACA was, and he was like, "Oh, it's the program that lets these kids work." And I was like, "Exactly, it just lets us work." And his misperception was that people who are here without paperwork are sort of like using up welfare benefits. And as we had talked, he said, "Well, you've been here for 20 years. Why didn't you apply to get legal? And why don't you just go to a lawyer next week and apply now?" And for me, it was just interesting to hear his perspective, and I think listening made a world of difference. And I told him there's no application that I can fill out to just get legal. There's nothing I can do. And so that's why immigration reform is so important to so many people, because what it does is allow us to fill out an application so we can go through that process. But by the end of that flight, 5 hours nonstop, we ended up being Facebook friends. And it was, it's fantastic. I think to me, it's the issue is that there's just a lot of misinformation, and people are maybe not necessarily educated on the issue. And I think part of it is that they haven't met dreamers, right? And so I think it's up to us to have those conversations with people to let them know what it's truly like and why DACA is so transformative and what it actually means to us. But I really fundamentally believe that if we meet people and we tell them our stories, I think that's what will help them change their perspectives.
And I want to echo what Lizia said. We live in all 50 states. We go to class with the average American. We shop at the same grocery stores. We are now lawyers, engineers, mothers who are building a life here. And sometimes people just don't realize that. Sometimes people don't know that the person sitting next to them in mathematics is actually a dreamer. Yeah. Or they don't know that the person who might be doing their paperwork for some sort of law-related activity is a dreamer themselves as well. So I think that's really important to stress out. It's that we are members of society, in all 50 states, doing a variety of different things, just trying to build a life in the country that we call home. And that's one of the biggest things when I share my story, especially when I went to college at Quinnipiac University. A lot of people had only heard the sound bites, why didn't you legalize? You're just taking away, citizens' welfare benefits, kind of echoing what Lizia said. And you gotta kind of talk them through it. Well, no, actually, there's no way to legalize. There's no line. And we're asking for Congress to create a line so that we can get in it. But a big thing is saying, hey, listen, I'm like you. There's definitely been days that I waited till the night before an essay that I had due to write it, just like many other college students, we experience similar things. And we are Americans who just are asking for the opportunity for the right paperwork so that we can finally feel 100% part of this country. So I think we're halfway there because we feel American, we're just lacking.
Right. And if there was a line, we'd be the first people in it.
Yeah.
I'm happy to pay for, I'll pay what I need to pay. I'll wait. There just needs to be a process for us.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I think some people miss is a lot of people say, hey, shouldn't you have to pay a penalty? And in order to get DACA, you have to pay $495 every time that you renew it. which is a pretty big fee, right, to pay in order to be able to work in this country and then go pay taxes on the work that you did.
And not to mention the lawyer's fees, right, to have somebody prepare that application for you. So it's expensive. It's expensive and it's time consuming.
And I think that's one of the misconceptions is that some people are saying that, this money is going to DACA, but we actually are paying for the process to actually have that permit. And but that's one of the things that I keep hearing too is like we're just wasting this money on this program, but it's completely untrue. And
then we get that permit, and like you said, Mark, we contribute billions and billions of dollars back to the economy. So we pay the $495. We get this work permit. We're safe from deportation, and then we give back to our communities, state and federal, and Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare, and so on. And we are just productive members of our society.
Right, and all those programs that we support, we don't qualify for because we're not citizens. So we basically we help fund Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare, but we can't pull from them ourselves.
Right.
So,
yes,
yeah. So if you don't mind me going to a pretty hard place here for a second, I'm curious to hear what is going to happen to your families if Congress doesn't act and doesn't pass something like the DREAM Act in the next 6 months.
Yeah, well, it's very hard to even think about, but we're in a place where we kind of have to see what would happen, and it's heartbreaking, but we would have to go back in the shadows, really, because we would be prioritized for deportation. In this administration, everyone is fair game. It's, DACA kids wouldn't be able to contribute what we're contributing, and so it's hard to think about. But what we'd have to go back in the shadows and stop contributing and pretty much wait. We would be in danger.
I think having a plan for it is hard. There's 2 DACA recipients in my family. It's me and my cousin. And there's just been a lot of anxiety over the past few days and few weeks of what our future is going to look like. And, at the end of the day, it's the people sitting in Congress and the president who's going to decide the future of 800,000 people like myself. So it's having to plan for a future that you do not want, having to plan to have to be sent back to a country you do not know, having to plan to not being able to work anymore, all those basic things, which has been really hard. But at the same time, I have confidence in the American people that they are going to call on the members of Congress, demand that they pass legislation like the DREAM Act. Because I think that the more and more we talk about it, more people are going to understand that we are Americans and that we grew up here and that, who really loses if we're deported?
It's really hard to have to convince people how American we are, right? 'Cause I think we feel it inside in so many ways. And sometimes I almost feel like it's sort of a boring story. Like, I was a Girl Scout and I played the cello and you played the clarinet. And people are like, well, yeah, that's the exact same thing that Americans did. Yeah. So it's not really fascinating in that sense. But I do think that there's so many obstacles that were uniquely in our way, just as undocumented people, that we had to overcome in order to be able to get a job and in order to be able to go to school and pursue an education. So I think DACA has been hugely transformative. The problem, though, now is that President Trump has ended the program, and so after basically if your DACA expires after March, you're sort of out of luck. And my DACA expires in May, which is about 8 months from now. So that's sort of my expiration date in the U.S. is May 5th, and I don't know what I'm going to do after then. I went to college to study journalism. I can't even spell words correctly in Canada. My second major was political science, which is American government and politics. Right, so I think at this point there really is no other option. Congress has to do something, and they need to do something soon. And we don't even have a 6-month window, because if, for example, the DREAM Act passes, there needs to be implementation of the program that happens. So Congress has to put together an application. People have to go consult lawyers. They have to fill out the paperwork. It takes time for those applications to process. And if this doesn't happen by March 6th, people are going to start falling out of status. And what that means is we are all going to become priorities for deportation. We could wake up at any moment, any day, and ICE could be knocking at our doors and put us in a detention center, and we could get shipped back. And I think of this as an eviction, like an unwarranted eviction from my home.
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight too that the 800,000 recipients of this program applied with a fee, but also we handed out all of our information to the government. They know where we live, they know a lot of personal information about us. We had to get our biometrics done, which is a background check to make sure that there was no criminal activity. So all that has been done, and now if the program is ripped apart and there's no DREAM Act or no similar legislation, the government potentially will have access to all of our information, and we don't really know what's going to happen with that either. So that's just an added stress to having to plan around not having a job and not being able to drive and potentially being deported.
Yeah. So let's talk about what Congress should do. We were talking about how they have 6 months technically, although if they don't move fast on something, then people are going to start being very worried, and people are already very worried, but people are going to start falling out of status, right? And won't have the time to make the preparations that they need to. So let's take a minute to talk about what people who are watching this can do. I know we're getting a lot of questions here from folks. Susan Rose wrote a few minutes earlier. Please tell us what the average American can do to help here. I would gladly have someone that needs a home stay with my family. My uncle was spared his life in Germany by hiding with priests. I think we appreciate that sentiment. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. There's upside here too, right? Which is that DACA was very limited, like you were saying, right? Which is that it was a work permit and it was temporary, and it's not a law, which means that it is brittle, right? As we saw with the president and his administration rescinding it. DACA also only gave around 800,000 people the ability to work, whereas there are more than 2 million dreamers. And it didn't give you a path to citizenship, which is a really fundamental, humane thing to have. So, what I think the good here is that if Congress acts and shows that they can lead, right? Which I know a lot of people are concerned about our government being able to get anything good done, and this is a real moment where folks who are in Congress who have signed up to lead and move the country in a good direction can show and prove to people that they can actually get something good done. The opportunity is not just to make sure that DACA doesn't fall apart. It's to provide the same hope and more to all dreamers, right? So all 2 or 2.5 million folks have a full pathway to citizenship, a permanent, written into law guarantee that they're going to have status here and be able to work. So that's the thing that we need to get done, and we have a limited period of time to do that. So a lot of the work that we're doing at Forward, and that you're all a part of, is trying to organize people to help do that. We have a website that we put up recently with resources on this, dreamers.forwardfwd.us, and that has resources on how you can contact your members of Congress, folks in the Senate and the House, in order to push forward on this. But I'm curious if you have any advice for the folks who are watching this on how they can help out being supportive to dreamers and to help push this forward in Congress.
I think at this point, this moment in history, the country has a very clear choice to make, right? We can call on our members of Congress to pass the DREAM Act immediately to protect myself and Tomas and Maria from deportation, or we can turn our backs on 800,000 Americans, people who know no other country. And so what we want to see people do is we would encourage them to call their member of Congress, call your representatives, call your senators every single day, demand that they pass the DREAM Act, demand that they bring this piece of legislation to a vote. And what this legislation would do is basically create an application that the three of us and 800,000 other people can fill out, so we can go through that background check, so we can become documented, so we can continue to work, so we can continue to give back to our country. I mean, I think it really boils down to the fact that we are already productive members of society, and if that gets taken away, if DACA is ripped away from us, that is not going to be possible for us. With DACA, I think the American dream is so close to us, like it is within reach for the first time in many of our lives. and without it, it feels like it is being ripped away from us. It feels really cruel.
Right. And like you were mentioning earlier, there's a sense of urgency. We only have 6 months, and it's pretty tough to think about that. But, this is an issue that has bipartisan support. Both Republicans and Democrats are looking at different bills. In the Senate, there's the DREAM Act of 2017, and in the House, there's the Recognize America's Children's Act, and also the American Hope Act. So there's multiple bills out there that people can call and ask their members of Congress to support. And so, there's a lot that the people here watching can do is call, because they're the ones that, they're the constituents of some of these members, and that they will listen, and that's how the American process works. And I urge everyone to call and voice their opinion and their support.
And you had a great conversation with Congressman Denham about this recently.
Yeah, Jeff Denham, who's in the Modesto area, is a huge supporter, and he's leading on the Republican side and having conversations with different members of Congress. And I urge people on both sides to be doing that. Have this conversation. Meet with a dreamer, and that's what changes most people's mind, is when they actually have us in front of them and are realizing that we're just as American as anybody else, and that we just want the best for this country and for our families. We have shared values, and so I urge Congress too to meet a dreamer. It's you probably have already met one, but sit down, have a conversation, and get to know us, and you'll realize that it's something not hard to support. It's the right thing to do.
Look, at the end of the day, I don't believe this should be political. It shouldn't be partisan. Maybe I'm being a little naive because of the current times that we are living in, but these are human lives. It's 800,000 and even potentially more. People who know no other country but America, who have grown up with our children, who, drive on the same roads that we do. So I think a big ask is for people to call their members of Congress. Tell your aunts and your mom and your friends and your colleagues. Say, hey, listen, I heard the stories of these dreamers. Or you can go to dreamers.fwd.us and you can see different stories of dreamers, and you can share our stories. Share our stories with your colleagues, with your friends, and say, we need you to call. Because the lives of 800,000 people depend on this.
Yeah, and you can use the hashtag #DefendDACA on Twitter or any other social channel. And I have a question for you, actually. What do you think businesses can do, and what is sort of like the impact of a DACA repeal on businesses? How would that impact your line of work specifically?
Sure. So let me get to that in a second. Although first, I just want to really emphasize something that you all were saying around urgency. Like you're saying, people broadly support Dreamers being here, right? By far, the vast majority of Americans, I think the last time that I saw the data on this, it was near 80% of Americans view Dreamers as American and want them to stay here, right? And so I think one of the big questions here is that, if a bill came up, then most people would want their member of Congress to support it. But what we need here is actually still more urgency, because bills don't just come up, right? People need to push on this, and we don't have that much time for this to happen. So part of what this means is making trade-offs, right? So, in the business community, which you were just asking about, one priority that a number of companies had pushed for is tax reform, right? And yesterday, some of the folks at Microsoft came out and said, hey, we've been pushing for tax reform, but this is more important. Do the DREAM Act first. And I think that's a lot of what this comes down to in terms of urgency. Is it's one thing for the vast majority of Americans to support something like this happening, but what I think really needs to happen is the majority of people need to say, hey, this is not only something I want to see happen, but this is something that needs to happen now. Because if it doesn't happen, then people's lives are going to be put at risk, and that's not going to be good for them. It's not good for what the country morally stands for. And like you're asking about, it's not good for our economy, because you're all doing valuable jobs that are serving someone, and you're serving different customers, and you're working jobs, you're at tech companies, and this is what the country is doing, right? And it would be just a massive setback, both morally, socially, and economically, if we fail to deliver on this. And We're getting a few more comments, I think, that are just worth highlighting here. And Kate Hansen wrote in, Lizia, Tomas, and Maria, you are so brave, and I agree with this, for sharing your stories and working so hard every day for your families and for millions of others. You make us all so proud. And I agree with her. And I know that the majority of Americans, your fellow Americans, do too. And in a time when it can, feel like, maybe the government doesn't seem like it always has your back, I just think it's important that you know that a lot of people stand with you. And we're going to fight alongside you to help get this resolved and get a good outcome, not just for the folks who are on DACA, but hopefully for all dreamers and undocumented folks. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks
Mark.
so much.
Thank you.